Expensive doesn't necessarily mean high quality in clothing, and that is one of many, many reasons why it's so incredibly difficult to know what makes a piece high quality or not, what makes a piece durable or not. High quality doesn't necessarily mean durability, but for most consumers, for the average consumer, they do correlate quite heavily with each other. So when I talk about high quality, what I'm referring to is a durable product that was made to last, made specifically for its intended use case, and where development, design, and also manufacturing paid attention to detail and made sure to make that product the best they could. In this little series, I'm going to be dissecting a couple of staple items of clothing and a bunch of different details that you can look at to see whether or not they did in fact pay attention to detail. I already did series on button-up shirts and blouses and on jeans in short format videos on Instagram, TikTok, and also on here. So if you want to watch them in shorts, feel free to do so. Today, I'm just going to put everything together in one long video regarding button-ups and blouses. So if you want to know how to spot your perfect button-up or blouse, go ahead and stay tuned. So let's get into it. Before you even look at any of the construction details of your shirt, the first thing you need to look at is the label on the inside and the material composition. What material you want your shirt to be fully depends on what you want from your shirt. I think I have it probably phrased a lot better in my short video, so in case you want to go reference that again, feel free. But essentially, just a quick little overview. If you want something that is very durable, great for summer, but it wrinkles very, very quickly, you will go for linen. If you want a fabric that is also breathable, just like linen, doesn't make you sweat too much, but might wrinkle a little bit less, you're going to go for cotton. The cool thing about cotton is with a specific treatment, it can also be made entirely wrinkle-free or iron-free. So if the shirt has that label, that is great for the people out there who don't like to iron. I really don't like to iron, so all of my non-iron-free shirts are just wrinkled, and the iron-free ones are my favorites. If you still want to do natural-ish fibers, so fibers at least based on natural materials, you can go for lyocell or viscose. Lyocell is the more sustainable out of those two, but viscose I would say is more readily available secondhand. If you want something really flowy and amazing for summer, but not very good for any like crazy work or strain put on it, you can go for silk. And if you highly prioritize incredibly strong colors, prints, if you like vintage, you're probably not going to be able to get around synthetics. I personally don't like synthetics. I have one red blouse that I love the fit of, I love the color of the fabric, I love the drape, but it is a synthetic and I need to wash it after every single wear. I don't feel good after like 3/4 of the day because I just feel so sweaty and but if that is okay for you guys and if you don't feel that way in synthetic, definitely you can look for those as well. And when it comes to material mixes, very quickly, elastane or spandex is what makes a fabric kind of stretchy, or essentially whenever the fabric stretches it makes it pull back. That's actually what it's doing. If you like to wear tighter things that are still comfortable, so you want a little bit of stretch, there can be a little bit of spandex in there. I would suggest definitely not more than 5% and best kind of more around like 3%. In general, as always, try to find them secondhand, but those are my kind of quick thoughts on all the materials that there are for shirts. First thing you're going to look at when you're looking at a button-up is going to be the button placket. There's a couple of things that you're looking for specifically. Number one, you want your button placket to be a little bit stiffer than the rest of the shirt. This means that they most likely ironed interfacing onto your button placket. Now, interfacing is essentially like a very thin fabric that has glue on one side. You iron it onto your fabric and that just stiffens it. It being stiffer just makes it stronger to, for example, your buttons pulling on the buttonhole, so it makes sure that those are less likely to tear. Number two, you want to look at the buttonholes themselves and also the buttons. You don't want loose threads. You don't want the buttons to look like they're already about to fall off. You want your buttonholes to be nice and tight. What this means is for the buttonhole, you can choose your stitch length, and if the stitch length is too long, that just means that it's really not sturdy enough, so you want to stay away from that. Longer stitches are easier to produce, therefore cheaper, which is why brands do it. you're going to look for a buttonhole which has very tight stitches. The next thing you want to look for is spare buttons. Most if not all shirts used to have spare buttons on the bottom of the button placket, but a ton of brands are skimping out on them. They are definitely more prominent in menswear. But if you are a woman and you have bought blouses, you know that most likely the blouse in today's age will not have a spare button. So if it has one, that is a very good sign that the brand wants you to be able to repair your clothes. Now, the button might be on the button placket. It's most likely there. If it's not, go ahead and check on the inside tag. There might be a spare button on that. Then when it comes to the button placket, especially if you have a larger bust, make sure that the buttons are positioned correctly for you. The buttons can be positioned correctly for every single person out there, but them being tighter together, especially on a very fitted blouse design, is a very good sign, because that just means you're not going to have your button placket pulling open. So definitely go ahead and try that blouse on. And then the very last thing is a button placket with hidden buttons. This is more difficult to make, more expensive to make when it comes to production. I personally do not like the look of it, so I don't go for them, but just so you know, usually a hidden button placket is a good sign. The second thing you're going to look for in your blouse is the shape of the blouse. And by the shape of the blouse, I mean specifically some pattern details. Now, those can be summed up into make sure that the brand understands that women have curves. So when it comes to the pattern, I'm not going to talk much about pattern of men's shirts, but specifically patterns for blouses. There are two things that you want to look out for. Number one, you want and need a bust dart. If a company doesn't put a bust dart into the blouse, that means that they do not care if it fits larger sizes properly or not. Now, a dart is there to give shape to your garment so the fabric piece isn't entirely flat, and you need that to go around your curves, especially at the bust. So if you're a larger size, a larger bust, make sure it has that bust dart there. If you're smaller, you are very lucky in the fact that you might not actually need it, but in general, it is very much a good sign if there is a bust dart, and a bad sign if there's absolutely no shape given through darts. Number two, if you have wider hips, make sure to once again try to blouse on and see if they gave you enough space around the hips. Now, especially men's shirts tend to be cut more straight, whereas blouses, it is a very good idea to have a little bit more space towards the bottom. Either that or they have to be a little bit shorter. So for me, I tend to have my blouses a little bit shorter, or whenever I wear a men's shirt, I don't button up the bottom button because it just does not fit me right. The third thing you're going to be looking at, so we had button placket, we had the pattern. Third thing is the collar. For the collar and the collar stand, so the collar is the big piece and the collar stand is the thin band that goes around your neck. Both of those, same thing as for your button placket, you want them to be a little bit stiffer. You want some interfacing in there to make sure that your collar keeps its shape. Specifically, dress shirts tend to have collar stays in the front to keep the tip very pointed and to make sure that the very front of your collar lays nicely. You do not need a collar stay in every single one of your shirts. It depends if it's a more dressy or a more casual shirt. However, especially if it's a more structured shirt, if it's a more dressy shirt, if there is a collar stay in there, that tends to be a good sign that they put that extra effort and extra material in there. And then the last thing when it comes to the collar, which is a very, very big indicator if this brand is proud of their shirts and is good at pattern making specifically for shirts, is the edge of your collar. So essentially for the edge of your collar, you have a top collar and a bottom collar. So the top collar is the one that's visible when you wear your shirt. The bottom collar is on the inside/underside. When you look at the edge, you want to be able to see mostly just the top collar and a tiny bit of the under collar. The way that is done is the pattern piece for the top collar is made just a little bit bigger in like all of the directions. So that kind of rolls around the edge a little bit. So when you look at it from the front, you don't actually see the edge where those two fabrics meet. That is something that a lot of more affordable brands, cheaper brands skip because they will just use one and the same pattern piece for both of those pieces, which, to be honest, I also do this in most of my sewing because I wear my shirts myself. But if you are a shirt brand and if you want to make it the proper way to do it is to have two different sizes for your collar pieces. So once again, whether you're in the store or whether you're buying your shirts secondhand, once you see that, that means that the brand knows what they're doing when it comes to shirts. The fourth thing you're going to look at is the cuffs of your shirt. Your cuffs, once again, want to be a little bit stiffer. They need to have some interfacing on there. The edges of your cuff, so the points, if they are very pointy at the cuff, that means that that point is a little bit prone to maybe the fabric fraying or rubbing and breaking and tearing right there. So what you really want is there to either be a curve on that corner, or if the corner is essentially kind of clipped, so it's two corners that are not as pointy, that's going to be more likely to last you longer than that first option. Even if that first option might be from a good shirt brand, if you are planning on wearing that shirt a lot in your day-to-day, I would not suggest it. And then the very last thing you're going to be looking at is going to be the seams. Seams are a massive indicator on whether or not this product was produced in a rush and cheaply or not. So firstly, you're going to turn the shirt inside out and you're going to look at the side seam. There is 3 ways that a side seam on a shirt is going to be done. Number 1 is a felled seam, which is the best of the seams where you don't see any seam allowance on either side. Essentially, your 2 pieces of fabric will be going like this and the seam allowance is encased on either side. Option number 2 is a French seam where you will sew your 2 fabric pieces together, kind of like this, and then you will sew them together again like this, which means that your seam allowance will be encased in the seam. So that is the second best version. And then the standard and the more affordable version is called a safety stitch. A safety stitch is essentially a combination of a straight chain stitch and an overlock stitch on the edge. The overlock stitch is there to make sure that the fabric doesn't fray, and the chain stitch is there to keep the 2 pieces of fabric together. That is the bare minimum. I have seen a couple of smaller brands use just an overlock stitch, which you should always stay away from that. Using only an overlock stitch to sew together woven fabric should not happen. If you're sewing together stretch, yes, just an overlock is fine, but for woven fabric, you always want either a straight chain or a regular straight stitch as well to keep those pieces of fabric kind of properly together. Otherwise, they like to pull apart.
Now your stitch length. You do not want your stitch length to be too long. Stitch length depends on what that seam is used for. If it is a seam that is going to have stress, the stitch length should be shorter. If it is just decorative top stitch, which really isn't going to hold that much stress, a longer stitch length is fine. In general, the longer the stitch length, the cheaper it is to produce. So that is why sometimes they definitely are too long for their job. And lastly, top stitching. Top stitching in general is a good sign. Top stitching doesn't have to be done to keep the garment together. It is only done to make it more durable, look crisper, and maybe sometimes just genuinely only for aesthetic purposes. So top stitching is a good sign. Those are some of the things you can look out for. In general, loose threads, puckering, skipped stitches, all of that is horrible. You want to stay away from that.